Welcome to Sleepy Tales. My name is Mateus, and before we begin today's story, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below saying, "I'll sleep well tonight." Now, sit back, relax, and let's dive into tonight's tale. It was a warm summer night in the small town of Willow Creek, and the air was filled with the sounds of laughter and music. The annual neighborhood block party was in full swing, and everyone was enjoying themselves. The smell of grilled burgers and hot dogs wafted through the air, and children ran around playing games. The host of the party, a wealthy businessman named Peter Johnson, was holding court near the pool, regaling his guests with stories of his latest business deals. His wife, Sarah, was mingling with the other guests, making sure everyone had enough to eat and drink. As the night wore on, the party began to wind down. Guests started to say their goodbyes and head home. But then, something happened that no one could have predicted. One of the guests, a quiet and unassuming man named John Parker, suddenly collapsed to the ground. At first, everyone thought he had simply had too much to drink, but when they tried to revive him, they realized something was seriously wrong. His skin was turning blue, and he was having trouble breathing. Peter Johnson immediately called 911, and within minutes, an ambulance arrived. But it was too late. John Parker was pronounced dead at the scene. The police were called to investigate the death, and they immediately began questioning the guests. Everyone was in shock, and no one had any idea how John Parker could have died so suddenly. As the police started to dig deeper, they discovered that John Parker had been poisoned. The poison was traced back to a dish of deviled eggs that had been served at the party. Suddenly, the partygoers were no longer just neighbors and friends, they were suspects in a murder investigation. And as the investigation continued, it became clear that someone at the party had a motive for killing John Parker. The once peaceful town of Willow Creek was now a place of fear and suspicion, and everyone was looking over their shoulder, wondering who could be capable of such a heinous act. The mystery of John Parker's death was just beginning, and the truth would not be easy to uncover. As the investigation into John Parker's death continued, the police started to interview each of the guests who had attended the party. They asked questions about their relationship with John Parker, their whereabouts during the party, and whether they had any motive to harm him. The investigation was slow going, and progress was frustratingly limited. There were no eyewitnesses to the crime, and the poison used to kill John Parker was not a common one, which made it difficult to track down the source. Despite the lack of progress, the residents of Willow Creek were on edge. They all knew someone among them was a murderer, and the thought of not knowing who that person was made everyone uneasy. Meanwhile, the police started to focus on the people who had been closest to John Parker. His ex-girlfriend, Rachel, was an early suspect. They had ended their relationship a few months prior, and John was said to be struggling with the breakup. Rachel denied having anything to do with his death, but the police kept her under surveillance just in case. Peter Johnson, the party's host, was also a suspect. He was known to be competitive and ruthless in his business dealings, and some wondered whether he had crossed the line and taken revenge on John Parker for some perceived slight. His wife, Sarah, was also under suspicion. She had a history of mental illness, and some speculated that she could have been involved in John's death. The investigation took a major turn when the police discovered that John Parker had been heavily in debt at the time of his death. He had borrowed money from several of his friends, including a large sum from Peter Johnson. This revelation led the police to consider the possibility that John Parker had been killed for financial reasons. The detectives also began to investigate the source of the poison used to kill John. They eventually discovered that it was a rare, expensive poison that was only available to a few people in the area. One of the people who had access to it was Sarah Johnson, Peter's wife. This discovery led to Sarah's arrest, and she was charged with John Parker's murder. At her trial, the evidence against her was circumstantial, but it was strong enough to convince the jury of her guilt. She was ultimately found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. The town of Willow Creek was shaken by the trial, but it also gave them a sense of closure. They knew that justice had been served, and that the killer had been brought to justice. The once friendly neighborhood block party had turned into a scene of murder and betrayal, but the community had come together to solve the mystery and bring closure to John Parker's family and friends. With the trial of Sarah Johnson over, the residents of Willow Creek breathed a sigh of relief. The town slowly began to return to its usual peaceful ways, and the memory of the murder began to fade. However, for the family and friends of John Parker, the pain and loss remained. They struggled to come to terms with the fact that someone they had known and trusted had taken his life. One person who had been deeply affected by the murder was John's sister, Emily. She had been living abroad at the time of her brother's death, but had returned to Willow Creek for the trial. After the trial ended, she decided to stay in town to help rebuild her family's lives. Emily felt that there was still much to be done to honor her brother's memory. She started a charity in his name, using the money donated by his friends to help people in need in the local community. She also organized a memorial service for her brother, inviting everyone who had known and loved him to come and pay their respects. The service was a touching tribute to John Parker's life. There were tears shed and memories shared, and it brought a sense of closure to everyone who had been affected by his death. As the town moved on from the tragedy, Emily continued to work tirelessly to keep her brother's memory alive. She volunteered at the local soup kitchen, organized a neighborhood watch program, and even started a campaign to get the park near her family's home named after her brother. Over time, her efforts paid off. The community began to heal, and John Parker's name became associated not with his tragic death, but with the good works that his family had done in his memory. Looking back on that fateful night, Emily couldn't help but feel grateful for the small town that had come together to solve the mystery of her brother's death. In the midst of tragedy and heartbreak, the people of Willow Creek had shown what they were capable of: strength, resilience, and a determination to never forget those they had lost. As Emily walked through the town she now called home, she smiled at the memories of her brother and knew that he would always be with her, watching over the community that had become her own. Thank you for listening to this bedtime story, and remember, if you struggle with falling or staying asleep at night, click on the first link in the description for the ultimate solution to your problem. Now, choose one of these two videos and continue on our journey in the world of bedtime stories.